thought as events unfolded this past week, I wonder if you watch the news, whichever news you follow, and read the newspapers, whichever newspaper, there's so much happening so fast that I thought, well, maybe I don't even have to do this class because I can't do it as fast as the events are happening. But I do want to mention, consistent with what we're talking about, that last week there was an election in Poland. And I told you last week that the authoritarianism in Poland appeared to have been reversed with the election of Donald Tusk as prime minister. Well, that all got scotched last week with the election of a real right-wing, isolationist new president by the name of Naraki, who is absolutely in line with Donald Trump. So Poland has reverted back by a free and open election to an authoritarian type of government. As if Poland isn't enough in the middle of Europe, Andrzej Duda is gone, but in the Netherlands, as I mentioned last week, Mark Rutte is the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, but this fellow Geert Wilder is in the side stage, ready to take over with his right-wing agenda. They had an election. Events are complicated, unfolded, but Geert Wilder was upset with the direction the Netherlands was going, and so he walked out, and the government collapsed. So right now you have Poland on the east of Europe electing a right-wing leader, a potential authoritarian leader, and on the west of Europe, the Netherlands, this Geert Wilder was so upset with what happened, and they have a combined government that he walked out, and the whole government collapsed. So as of this morning, there is essentially chaos in the Netherlands in terms of determining in which direction they're going to go. All right, so that's the current news that happened just since I last saw you last week. Both of these countries turning towards authoritarian type regimes. He walked out. So what does the world look like today? Well, you can see from this map, which is a rough approximation, that only 7.8% of the world's population is living in a full democracy. Either authoritarian, almost 40% of the world, or a flawed democracy, an illiberal democracy, such as in Turkey or Hungary. And just in Europe, you can see what the map looks like in terms of authoritarian governments that people have elected and chosen, just as they have elected the government here in the United States. So Joe Medlicott's suggestion to me a few years ago that I read "It Can't Happen Here" is certainly appropriate and germane to what is happening here. So it's fair with all of this turning and people choosing an authoritarian type government for other reasons, but including getting a bicycle path built, which is still not built here in Hanover because we talk about it, but we have a democracy, so it's not happening. It's fair to ask, why the popularity? It's happening. So it's fair to ask, why? Why are there much of the world choosing authoritarian type governments? Economic inequality and globalization. Whether from outsourcing or robotics, the loss of manufacturing jobs have left many working class citizens behind, causing frustration and resentment. It's not just in the United States. 53% of Americans do not have a college degree. One would not appreciate that living in Hanover, New Hampshire. Right-wing parties offer false promises of policies that will help or create new local industries and jobs. That's what they're told. International trade agreements, immigration policies, global institutions have disadvantaged rural populations. Right-wing leaders exploit frustration by promising to take back control of national economies. Just pick up every morning's New York Times and you see that exactly. The United Kingdom's Brexit and Make America First are examples, if not Make America Healthy Again. Cultural backlash, increasing global migration, is seen to threaten the preservation of national culture and identity. Right-wing ideologies leverage these fears, using anti-immigration rhetoric to gain support. The preserving of traditional social values involving family, religion, race, gender, sex, and lifestyle are seen under attack by liberal democratic forces. Those with limited education and accustomed to a closed mind see as important, critical, if you will, the defense of tradition against perceived moral decay. We need to go back, make our country great again. Fears of changing demographics, increasing people from another country, or send them back, and a declining local birth rate is changing the complexion of the country in question, or a neighborhood. Most of us feel uneasy about the unknown, with a rise in xenophobic sentiments. We shouldn't feel so righteous that this couldn't be us. And older populations, us, have generally grown up in relatively homogeneous societies. We find it harder than do our children to adapt to demographic changes. Right-wing authoritarian leaders tap into these anxieties by framing themselves as the champions of the native population's interests. The rise of social media and polarized news outlets act as echo chambers, reinforcing our existing beliefs. We listen to that which we agree. And I admit, I do it like everyone else. With each evening's news, we reinforce that which we, quote, know to be correct. We listen to Rachel Maddow. Or we listen to Laura Ingraham, reinforcing our extreme positions. Gone forever, I suppose, is the unvarnished news by Eric Sevareid, or the wisdom of Edward R. Murrow. Right-wing media figures frame their political opponents as existential threats, galvanizing their base with survival instincts. Right-wing populists present themselves as anti-establishment, promising to drain the swamp, as exactly the same words as Benito Mussolini used in Italy, disparaging so-called elites and any type of woke culture. Tomorrow will belong to me. Security concerns and terrorism. Right-wing movements link terrorism and existential threats to immigration and multiculturalism, frightening the public so that fearful they accept strict border controls and limit due process. And we all know this locally with our friend Mohsen Madawi, about whom I'll say more later, who sits now in Vermont, across the river, and afraid to cross the Ledyard Bridge to come in and have breakfast at Lou's, because he will be arrested. And I'll have more to say about this. We do this in the name of security and safety, if not foreign policy. Populist authoritarians with a strong hand promise to protect the nation from both internal and external threats. And no one could know this more than our friend Mohsen, who many of you know either personally or in class with me, who now sits in Vermont and cannot leave the state of Vermont without being arrested. charismatic populist leaders, champions of the people, rise out of the population and appeal to right-wing ideologies. Bolsonaro of Brazil, Viktor Orban of Hungary, Marine Le Pen of France, and Donald Trump have rallied large swaths of the population who were dissatisfied with the status quo by presenting themselves as outsiders who are fighting against a corrupt political system. These leaders use rhetoric that vilifies elites, the media, education, and the political establishment. They speak decisively, however dishonestly and naively, that their magic cure will fix everyone's problems. They have an incredible knack of convincing masses to believe them. Last night at dinner, some friends of ours looked at Faye and me and said, "Do you think you're part of the elite? Do you consider yourselves elite?" And I thought about that for a minute. I said, well, it all depends who's thinking. I don't think any of us think of ourselves as elite. That's not how we go around every day. But you can be sure that there are others who think that of us, that we're those elite, that they perhaps greatly resent. Social media platforms and the internet have allowed right-wing movements to spread their message worldwide, using memes, targeted ads, and online communities to rally support. Platforms amplify fear-driven narratives and encourage extremist views, allowing them to gain traction uncensored, uncorrected. And disinformation and conspiracy theories. The spread of disinformation, conspiracy theories, for instance, QAnon, and alternative facts on the internet has unquestionably bolstered right-wing movements. These narratives destabilize trust in facts, making it easier for far right-wing populists to frame their policies as truth against the so-called fake news of the mainstream media. So I think it's fair, now that we see that the world is turning in an authoritarian direction, and God bless us, so is this country, to ask, what personality traits do authoritarian leaders have in common? That's a fair question. In order to analyze who is leading our government and what does he have in common, or is he an outlier to this group? What do they have in common? And so it's Donald Trump that we ask, how similar in his personality traits are those to recognized authoritarian leaders around the globe, and what traits do they have in common? So let me go through a few, and you think to yourself, is that correct? Is that correct, these traits that David, in his reading, has come up with? 1, narcissism. A sense of superiority and self-importance. Grandiose sense of their own abilities. Need for control. Not just political landscape, but narratives, economy, social, cultural, educational institutions. They strive for unchallenged power in every one of those categories. They each have a low tolerance for dissent. You disagree with me and you're gone. Gone the next morning. Criticism, suppressed by censorship, intimidation, violence, insecurity, and fear of losing control. And the headlines, what? Yesterday, Elon Musk is either thrown out, walks out. Maybe that's a blessing, but it all fits the pattern of a low tolerance for dissent. Paranoia. These authoritarian leaders see threats and conspiracies everywhere. They centralize power, and they do their best to eliminate perceived rivals, whether in the courtroom, in the Justice Department, in our health agencies. They're gone. And they're all manipulative, using propaganda. They shape public opinion, maintain favorable image, using loyalists to enforce their policies. Cynicism and pragmatism. Any means to maintain power, violating laws, using unethical or illegal practices, making deals with other powerful elites and external powers. Moral absolutism. Their view of the world is absolutely black and white. You're either with me or against me. There are no nuances. Their view is the only right one. That viewpoint justifies harsh measures. They see themselves as protectors of the nation or the people at the cost of human rights and democratic norms. Aggression and aggressiveness in rhetoric and action. Provoking conflicts, use military force, distract the public from the real domestic issues. And what's been said over and over in Washington, and one sees, whether it's Turkey or Hungary or by Le Pen in France, is a lack of empathy. Harsh policies, response to suffering, punitive rather than compassionate. So, appreciating what these leaders have in common, now let's ask, what are the tools that authoritarian leaders use? Again, what does our government presently today have in common with the tools that they use that's in common with authoritarian leaders throughout the world? So let's go see a few of these to convince ourselves that this is what's happening, and that Sinclair Lewis back in 1935 was prescient in writing, "It can't happen here." It can, and I'm doing my best to convince you it is. But maybe you don't need my convincing. Tools generally fall into 5 categories: a greater nation, propaganda, virility, corruption, and violence. And these are the tools that every one of the leaders use, without exception, in the countries that have gone in that direction. A greater nation, a strong man who will make this a greater nation. Heil Hitler, collective transformation, the straight-arm gesture used by Hitler, Mussolini, and Elon Musk. The real aim: to sap everyone's dignity, damage the bond of civil society, risk everything to save the nation, crusades against leftist subversives, discredit other national male icons, undo Obama, and undo Joseph Biden. And you see it happening in the headlines every day. And then control over female bodies, which we'll get to as we go. So they work in 3 time frames. These are the tools that they use. The first is a future utopia. Make America, make Italy great again. The reference is to future international prestige. Balance the payments, the right and the need in our future for expansion We need to be bigger and greater to have this future utopia. We need Greenland. We're going to annex Canada as the 51st state. We're going to take over the Panama Canal. Every one of these movements is consistent with each of these authoritarian leaders doing exactly the same thing, much less renaming the Gulf of Mexico. You laugh, but it's not funny. This is part of the plan of how fascism, if not authoritarianism, has come to America, to present a glowing future that will redeem a bleak present. Tomorrow will belong to us. And then refer back to that past nostalgia. For better times, we need to make the country great again. Defend a white Christian European heritage with an unchallenged white male power structure. And then the present crisis. Declare an emergency on the first day in office. Do you remember, well, you don't remember, but we all read about what happened in 1933, the day Adolf Hitler took power. Someone, still yet to be determined, set fire to the Reichstag building in Berlin. That's like burning down our Capitol. That was their parliament building. And on the first day of Hitler's rule, the Reichstag went up in flames. Now, why was that? It was certainly, looking back, the reason and the excuse for Adolf Hitler to proclaim martial law. This is an emergency. All the normal laws of civility are gone. We have an emergency, and I claim martial law so I can control everything, and there was never another election held in Germany. Never. So what's the counterpart? The counterpart was Project 2025. They didn't set fire to the Capitol. That happened on January 6th, a few years before. But what did happen was that all of these executive orders were prepared ahead of time, so that you remember Donald Trump going through and signing dozens of executive orders really fast as a fire could consume the Reichstag. And all that had been carefully planned. And don't think that that kind of plan wasn't discussed with Viktor Orban, who came to the White House 3 times to discuss with Trump how to take over this country in as efficient a manner as Orban had done in Hungary. This is when he claimed Greenland, Panama Canal, claimed the minerals, renamed the states, xenophobia, immigrant fears of white replacement, racial fears. Consider them an invasion. Consider everybody here, whether they came here illegally or illegally, as an invasion. And that gives us the right to scotch civil liberties and the writ of habeas corpus. Deport them. Just deport them, because we're claiming that this is an invasion. So gone was any consideration of the Bill of Rights, which we hold sacred and which we grew up understanding, and causing disdain right here and right in Norwich, Vermont, is the ditching of the writ of habeas corpus, which is essentially, from Anglo-Saxon heritage of law, the command that one must face a court and you're innocent until proven guilty. And that's been scotched. As I told you last week and showed you, Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire asked Kristi Noem to explain the writ of habeas corpus, and she got back a blank view from the person Trump appointed as head of Homeland Security, and she said, well, that gives the government the right to send anyone away. And then there's Stephen Miller, who sort of boggles my mind. I asked myself, how did he turn out like that? How does someone end up like that? And so apparently, this isn't a good answer. But I have to admit, to artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, because I didn't know where else to go to find out about Stephen Miller. Well, apparently he comes from a right-wing mix of personal rebellion. He grew up in Los Angeles, Santa Monica. A right-wing mix of personal rebellion, early ideological influence, that doesn't say much, feelings of alienation. I don't know why. I don't know what happened in junior high school or with his family. If any of you learn, I'd love to know it. Does anybody know now more than I've been trying to find out? How does somebody end up like that? And reframing of his immigrant heritage. After all, I would guess, I don't know this, but I would guess his ancestors came from the Ukraine, just as mine did, as many of yours did. That's the same with Stephen Miller. I don't get it. Identity, environment, and ambition in Stephen Miller combined to produce views that seem to contradict one's background. I just don't understand. And then, consistent with all of this story, is Kristi Noem and her view of what the writ of habeas corpus is about. Claim of embodying the state. Trump claimed that it was only he who could lead this country to greatness. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders was quoted as saying, in front of the camera, God wanted Donald Trump to be president. Stimulate feelings of humiliation and anxiety, repression at home, resentment of the truly educated. You know, and I'm going to talk more about this, that Donald Trump was rejected as an admissions application to Harvard. Target universities, exactly as Pinochet had done in Chile. Imprint themselves on the landscape, renaming the Gulf of America. English should be our national language. Roll back government regulations. Boost the economy by privatization. I'm just waiting for the headlines to tell us that the United States Postal Service has been taken over and put in private hands. And I walk in the post office here in Hanover and ask, what's going on? And he looks at me blankly. Dave, you know, at the left-hand counter in Hanover, it used to be Frank on the right. And I go in and ask them, what's going on? And they just shrug their heads and I don't know how soon the Postal Service is going to be taken over. They present themselves as no alternative to their rule. With regard to Hillary, send her back, lock her up. Racism, the use of Confederate flags in Charlottesville, the protection of Christian freedom of religion, and vouchers in public schools. I don't need to go into the details, but you read the recent Supreme Court case where Amy Coney Barrett recused herself, and this had to do with Oklahoma wanting a voucher school for religion, and that federal funds should go for a religious school. And this went up to the Supreme Court, and the vote was a tie, 4-4. Amy Coney Barrett recusing herself because she had ties with the people involved in this, but just wait till the next time around. And the wall between church and state is crumbling. Detain without a trial, forget due process, ignore the courts, dismissal of masses of government workers, raising government institutions, create chaos, manipulating elections, harassing a free press, a brand of nationalism, emotions of fear and victimhood, stoking the past and present grievances. These are the tools that these leaders use. Transfer power to family and allies, domestic repression, and then propaganda. In propaganda, as in love, anything is permissible which is successful. Present the story as authentic interpreters of the popular will. The goal of publicity and propaganda is to instill loyalty, fear. Propaganda legitimates authority with lies and falsehoods. Tell it often enough and it becomes accepted. The ends justify the means. The leader is the protector. Sow confusion, uncertainty, discourage critical thinking. Reality is what the leader says it is. Attention management through repetition. Previous experience. Well, it's interesting. Some of these leaders are really good at what they're doing because of their previous experience. For instance, in marketing and television, Berlusconi and Trump and Putin, they all knew how to manage the media and propaganda. Pinochet, Franco, the military optics of power and pageantry. They came into office skilled with these abilities. The more skilled with media politics, the more their admirers see him as authentic and feel a personal connection with him. It legitimates their authority. Becomes specialized in manipulation, falsification, and concealment of information. You can feel their voice laden with emotion. For Hitler, his chief weapon was propaganda and fool the German public. And then we have in our day social media, laptops, and smartphones. It's a portable propaganda feed with which we walk around in our breast pocket. It never leaves us. The use of Facebook and Twitter to target critics, spread hate speech, conspiracy theories, and lies. Twitter has been for Trump what newsreels were for the European fascists, a direct channel to the people that keeps him constantly in the news. Trump uses simple vocabulary, misspelled words. One might think a curated sense of authenticity, but simple, repeated sentences are who Trump is. Designed for instant impact, which encourages feelings of omnipotence. Twitter is the perfect tool for an impulsive, attention-addicted strongman. Now, if you're in favor of an authoritarian government, and maybe some of you are, then these are all success tools because they are achieving success, and maybe you're pleased with them. I'm not here to tell you which to favor. I'm just showing you, trying to show you what's happening. And you may like it, you may not, but it's successful. Disappear people, but also disappear knowledge that conflicts with ideologies. Pinochet in Chile closed down philosophy departments. Orban banned gender studies. He closed down the Central European University. Trump, if he had his wishes tomorrow morning, would close down Columbia and Harvard. Trump wants to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion across the country, including the Dartmouth office of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Don't consider climate change science and medical science. All the research that's being done here in this building, forget it. Read what Robert Kennedy Jr. wants to make life and medicine simple for everybody. Vaccines, ridiculous. Blur the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false. Misinformation sustains illusions of competency. Discredit and deny unflattering realities. So I suppose it's fair to ask, reporters do, how often did Donald Trump lie in his first 4 years in office? How often did he tell the American public just out and out falsehoods? Well, in 2017, the calculation is he told lies 5.9 times every day. That's the average, 5.9 times every day. He told 22 lies per day in 2019, and over the 3 years, the New York Times counted 16,241 lies that he told the American public. And so, along with tools of propaganda come virility and corruption. So let's look at this idea of virility. It is common for strong men to boast of their virile powers. Men and women are both attracted. The virile man, a blend of every man and Superman. The common man feels vindicated about his own transgressions, whether real or imaginary. Admiration for the power to get away with most of us consider tawdry behavior. Mussolini, Gaddafi, Putin, Berlusconi, Trump, Musk were all known for their misogynist predilections. Bare-chested photographs advertise the fitness and potency of Mussolini and Putin. Gaddafi, Berlusconi, Trump, and Musk have vaunted their control of desirable women. Berlusconi, like Trump, had assumed political power after running a business network of beauty pageants, TV shows, and pornography sites. Actresses, for a constant supply of attractive women. For Trump, as with Berlusconi, the government becomes a tool of self-defense, covering up these interests and predilections. For the strong man, he and he alone can have as many women as he wants. Gaddafi had set up a state-assisted machine for libidinal gratification, which lasted 2 decades. Mussolini was known to have had extramarital sex with up to 4 different women daily during his 23 years in power. He actually had a pyramid. Rachel, or Rachel, however you pronounce it, his wife was on top of this pyramid, with major lovers with the names Sarfati and Patacci, and then a dozen or so for once-a-month trysts. For Berlusconi, Lila Mora was the agent handling his trysts, keeping a record and a schedule, handling lodging, payoffs, and gifts. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but for Berlusconi, it was this woman, El Murag. She was underage. She was given $300,000 worth of gifts and 4.5 million euros by Berlusconi for her services. It was all about humiliating and violating women and feeling and being seen as powerful. Virility for the authoritarian makes taking what you want and getting away with it the measure of manhood. Trump had run a model management company for 18 years, from 1999 to 2017, and the Miss Universe pageant for 19 years, from 1996 to 2015, as exactly exactly as Berlusconi and Mussolini, Gaddafi had also done. When running for his first term, a 2005 Access Hollywood tape became public. We all remember that, in which Trump was recorded as having talked about grabbing a woman by her genitals. I said to Faye, that's it, he's done. That'll wipe him out. At that point, I didn't understand what I'm presenting to you today. That's all part of the plan. That all grabs votes. And these people with this record were voted by the people into power. Trump famously said, when you were a star, they let you do it. That's on tape, and we all watched it, and I remember saying to Faye, that's it, he's over. Trump had built his misogynist brand of male glamour over decades. He had taught men across our country that if they were sufficiently strong, they can act on their desires with impunity. The exploitation and impoverishment of women might be thought to have been a negative for Trump with female voters, but not so. It didn't turn out that way. While dozens of women from every era of his life have accused Trump of sexual harassment or assault, from the Miss Universe pageant and apprentice contestants, and Mar-a-Lago guests to business and campaign senior staff. I'm not sure that it's totally Melania's interest in her son, Barron, is why she stays in New York City, isn't it the White House in Washington? Trump takes this all in stride, appointing women to positions of authority. But they must have a certain attractive look, appealing to men, mimicking exactly the women Fox News chooses to tell us the news, appealing to conservative male viewers. Their appearance: polished, glamorous, heavy makeup, long hair, fitted dresses, high heels. They present a spectacle. They appear as a celebrity. They look the part, and many of them have been ex-beauty queens. They, each of them, intense loyalty, articulate, unwavering, and every one of them is aggressive. Just listen to his press secretary. They're quick, they're smart, they're aggressive. Their ideological alignment, of course, gets checked out ahead of time. Anti-abortion and anti-immigration. They're trained to argue, and they're trained to entertain. And many of them, amazingly, have law degrees, journalism degrees, and they've been in pageants. And then I ask you, why do I have up there a picture of Dartmouth? Any ideas, suggestions? Why do I have a picture of, yes?
Dylan.
I'm sorry?
They had, the Dartmouth Review is on his payroll.
Dartmouth Review is on his payroll?
The woman who was the editor, Laura Ingram.
Exactly. It's Laura Ingram.
Wow.
It's Laura Ingram. A little side story which doesn't prove anything. But a couple years ago, Faye and I were walking down the street we live on in Winter in Santa Barbara. And we met a gentleman walking down the street and we started talking, became good friends. He told me he's from Boston. He used to work for Polaroid and very much into that world from Boston. And he moved out to Santa Barbara and we became nice friends. Faye's smiling. And I thought, we met a really nice new friend from Boston. His last name was Ingram. I didn't think anything about it until, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 visits later with him and his wife, that he said he had to admit to us that he knew about Dartmouth because his sister is Laura. And that led to some interesting afternoon get-togethers. The women that are chosen and whose photographs, some of whose photographs I've shared with you, the women learn to advance in their careers. They must make it easy for their leader to dominate other women. Otherwise, they suffer retribution. You're either with me and advance what our leader wants, or your history and will suffer. Female appointees apparently don't care about a leader's misogyny. Their surviving and serving the leader opens doors for them to a political career. It's been referred to as a horocracy. Unlimited wealth and unchecked power creates a misogynist monster who thinks he is God, and so proclaimed by Miss Huckabee. Elon Musk is known to have had at least 5 women with whom he has had children, and he counts at least 15 children to whom he is their father. Then the Me Too movement. This movement is dangerous to men in power. And the people for the Me Too movement should be ridiculed and ignored, just as we get rid of the DEI offices across the country. But interestingly, faced with women of equal authority, strong men react similarly. Trump, as you can see here, refused to shake Angela Merkel's hand. Putin, at an appointment, kept her waiting for hours in an anteroom. Between their endless demands for attention and impulsivity, these men are high maintenance. Hell hath no fury like a strong man in a bad mood, which is any time he feels slighted or criticized or doesn't get his way. There is a parallel. Thriving on the gratifying sensation of dominating a woman's life is consistent with power over others in politics. That's the parallel. The public and women. Public humiliation of homosexuals sets the tone for the cult of virility to police all of society. It's a haven for misogynists, belligerent manhood. Followers of an authoritarian regime see him as their strong male leader that their country needs, with posters reminding us of the strength, such as John Wayne and Superman, Sylvester Stallone. As a man turning 79, Trump borrows other men's bodies to show his virility, such as Pete Hegseth, who is our Secretary of Defense, who I would be amazed if he knows the end of a gun, one from the other, with no experience of leading any sizable group of people in an organization, and he's our Secretary of Defense defending this country. In 2019, Trump had his Department of Justice, Office of Violence Against Women, change the definition of domestic violence. No longer, under orders from Trump, no longer would sexual, emotional, economic, or psychological actions that harm a woman be considered a felony or even a misdemeanor. Violence against women would be limited to acts which cause physical harm. Any other infringement on a woman's rights is off the books and not to be considered. Rather than saluting the flag, Trump hugs the stripes and kisses the stars. He's an emotional guy, passionate. And so what about the fourth rule? The fourth tool in authoritarian rule? Certainly corruption. Abuse of public power for private gain. Disregard for the conflicts of interest. Use of state resources for private use. Sham audits. Avoidance of paying taxes. Ever heard of that? Profiting from privatization. Embracing laws to facilitate or decriminalize wrongdoing. A style of governing. Public office has nothing to do with public service. It's a vehicle for private enrichment, as well as escaping prosecution for crimes. Purges of the judiciary, journalists, and activists. Virility makes taking what you want and getting away with it the measure of manhood. Life in governing is a game. It's who has the cards, and it is that who that can change the rules. Patronage system, opportunities for wealth which overcome moral hesitations. The core of the contract between the ruler and his enablers is the offer of power and economic gain in exchange for making possible his illegal, if not his unconstitutional actions, and his suppression of civil rights. Create a climate of insecurity and dependency on the leader. Complicity is required, an absolute requirement, knowing that if you don't comply, you will suffer severe retribution. I often think of that when I see Trump sitting in that, I guess it's his Oval Office with these couches, and Pam Bondi and Pete Hegseth and these other secretaries sitting with him, and their obviously willingness to go along with him, it just boggles the mind. Because he's created a climate of insecurity, each of these persons know that there will be severe retribution to their careers should they walk out. Granting amnesties and pardons for past crimes indebt individuals to the leader, allowing him to ask for the performance of future crimes. So when you read about Trump last week pardoning these hardened criminals, they are totally indebted to him to commit future crimes at his whim and will. Profits for you, political support for me. Pay to be an ambassador. Pay for a presidential pardon. Freedom for others to pollute the earth in exchange for support for me. The only useful non-Americans are those who invest in his crypto schemes. Global resorts or large airplanes as a palace in the sky. The leader appoints himself to positions of power, even for a non-powerful organization such as the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. Ignoring the emoluments clause of the Constitution. Conflicts of interest are absolutely ignored. Hotels and country clubs, accepting gifts from foreign countries and airplanes. He gets away with it all. The people going along with him, and it's mind-boggling that Congress goes along with him. I was sure 6 years ago that this Trump hotel, which took over the old post office building in Washington, was it was in the front pages that this was a violation. Nobody argued with the emoluments clause of the U.S. Constitution. Nothing happened. Nothing. No more happened with Robert Mueller's investigation of Trump's ties with Russia. Nothing happened. A style of governing. Refusal to change views with new information. Unwillingness to listen to others. I am never wrong. Fact and fiction, whichever works. Lack of respect for the law. Divide and rule. No appointee should feel secure. Loyalty or lose your job. No criticism is tolerated. Fire those who are not willing to conspire in corruption and subversion of the law. The first to go was Sally Yates, and then Andrew McCabe, and then James Comey. One by one, they didn't go along. They questioned, and one by one, they were gone. Loyalty or lose your job. In the last Trump administration, he had a 68% turnover of high-level positions. In his first term, 100,000 civil servants left, retired, or were fired, as Trump rid himself of experts and critics. And that's peanuts compared to how many have been fired in the past few months from our government. Conformists thrive, dissenters depart as they refuse to join. Actually reading a book or a paper is not necessary. Familiarity with the U.S. Constitution is a waste of time. Further family financial interests with government assignments. Drain the swamp, but we're in waist high. The strong man remains above it all. His underlings go to jail without a whit of empathy or care. And here are some photographs of 8 of the most prominent men who went out of their way to serve Donald Trump. And each of them ended up behind bars. And there wasn't, as far as we know, one whit of thanks or empathy or gratitude for these people who worked for him, and by so doing, they each ended up behind bars. Michael Cohen, David Weisselberg, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, George Papadopoulos, Stephen Bannon, and Michael Flynn all ended up behind bars because they did Trump's bidding, and what's worse is the president couldn't have cared less. The presidential funds and his money is exempt from accounting, never revealing their own tax records and avoid paying taxes. The laundering of money through real estate investments. Retain sole control of patronage and punishment systems. Cabinet terms have been short. Here you see Rex Tillerson, James Mathis, and Jeff Sessions. Gone, gone, gone. Wealth creation is a path to salvation. Govern in chaos, hide the crimes, get rid of the disloyal. Dismantle agencies, entire bureaucratic structures, large agencies, mass organizations, entire legal frameworks are taken apart. Propaganda and censorship to cover up corruption and incompetence. Populate the government with the very rich, gaining cooperation with either the threat of loss or the promise of material gain. When the ruler himself is under investigation, governance becomes secondary to attempts to escape prosecution. And we all know the ties, or should know the ties, in this regard between Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, who's under indictment, and Donald Trump. Russian illicit wealth is laundered with the help of the Trump Organization. Eric Trump was quoted as saying, and this is in quotes, when asked, "We don't rely on American banks. We have all the funding we need from Russia." Mixing of personal and business interests, always claiming a witch hunt. sycophantic and secretive relationships. Coming into politics with decades of improper business practices behind him, Trump was highly skilled at corrupting others. He visited his properties on 331 out of 1,075 days in office. 1/3 of his time was devoted to self-enrichment, exactly as the authoritarian leaders I've shown you. The president and his wife did and continue to become vendors of their own brand. Normal for authoritarian leaders to be impetuous, adversarial, petty, ineffective leaders, full of reversals of policy decisions, obligations to others to sing their praises, rage at anyone who opposes his will. And take Elon Musk, for example, today. Those who understand from President Trump that furthering Putin's geopolitical aims is an administrative priority. That was true of Stephen Mnuchin, who was our Secretary of Treasury, and Elaine Chao, the wife of Mitch McConnell, who was Secretary of Labor and Secretary of Transportation. Sliding into corruption starts with the act of staying silent in meetings, while lies wash over you, unchallenged, making you a co-conspirator. Requests for public tributes escalates to attacks on institutions, including the one you serve. What he wants is to make you his. With lightning speed, it is the fascist playbook to transform the state, the federal bureaucracy, and the judiciary into a tool for the consolidation of executive power and accumulation of personal wealth. Not yet mass arrests here in the United States, but mass deportations and the arrest of judges and opposition politicians. You use his language, praise his leadership, tout his commitment to values, and then you are lost. He has eaten your soul. At this point, let's take a break, and I'll see you in 15 minutes. See you in 15 minutes. Okay, can you hear me in the back now? We're okay? All right. I want to mention that through the good graces of what's called JAM, or Junction Arts Media, which is in White River Junction, which used to be the public broadcasting public station. It's now called Junction Arts Media. They are video recording yesterday's class and today's class. Race, thank you, Race, for your expertise. I don't know how he does this, but he's one man running two cameras. And everything will be video recorded and available on my website for you to see, including when we did the Israeli-Palestinian thing last year. That's available too. Osher has chosen not to make, apparently not to make video recordings available of various classes, even though they're doing hybrid. I don't know all those decisions, but they're not. And so those of us who wish to arrange it privately do so. And so that's where they're all there, and we'll let you know when, a couple weeks, they need to process it. And I just learned that they know how, I don't know how to do this, but normally I take all my PowerPoint slides and put them on a memory stick and give it to them to insert so that they don't have to photograph the screen. They get it straight. Well, I don't have to do that. They know how to do some deal here with my computer. That's what we're fooling. So it goes directly into their editing process. So it makes it very automatic. So all the, yes?
When you say it's on your website, what does that mean?
It means...
How do we find you?
Well, davidbisno.com.
Thank you.
It couldn't be easier. Just davidbisno.com. And then there are various categories from which you can select, and you click on topics. There are 6 chapters or categories. And just click topics, and then you go down and pick whatever you want. And you can see there are 2 lectures by Mosen. They were video recorded. So you can see Mosen speaking here and speaking in California. So, but these would be a race. How long does it take to get this processed and available?
It's about a week.
Okay, a week, and they'll be available. So hopefully Lisa will be able to send you out a note that they're available. But it's very easy. davidbisno.com, click on topics, and then choose whatever you wish.
Is it David Bisno's all one word?
Yes. One word, davidbisno.com. Okay. The situation is so bad and so scary that a number of you came up and said to me, David, you have to really be either strong or crazy to do this. And that's a sign of how bad it is. And I've had a couple people say, just don't use the word fascism. That's apparently, where's Bob Rogby? Bob, you have any thought about that? Bob is an expert on Mussolini. Do you have any thought about using that word?
Yeah, I just finished a course on Mussolini. I was a little concerned that I'd get some reaction from some quarters, but yeah, it's a big concern.
So for some reason that word fascism ignites sort of fire in people's minds. And so I've tried to use the word authoritarianism. And I ran that past a few people and said, yeah, that's better. The message is still frightening. So let me pick up where I left off. In the 5th tool of rule by authoritarianisms. We've gone through 4. The 5th is violence. The strong man's need for total possession. Break the will of the people. The leader sees physical measures against his enemies as necessary and justified. The violence becomes real. His avariciousness for bodies and minds knows no bounds. One knows that something is rotten in the state of Denmark or Washington, D.C. when a president pardons 160 criminals who attacked our Capitol on January 6th and fires those Justice Department career attorneys who spent months accumulating evidence to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that major crimes, including murder, had been committed, and those to whom we entrusted responsibility are staying silent out of fear of retribution. Though this madness, yet there is method in it. And those to whom we entrusted responsibility are staying silent out of fear of retribution. A compassionate culture becomes transformed into one of surveillance and threat. A new set of morals that legitimates harming others. The strong man's need for total possession, including the use of violence, breaks the will of the people. The serpent that did sting my father's life now wears his crown. The violence becomes evident. The avariciousness for bodies and minds becomes all too real. The leader sees measures against his enemies as necessary and justified. Lessons from Vladimir Putin. There are 3 ways of influencing a person: blackmail, vodka, and the threat of murder, i.e. Khashoggi and his murder. Part of the scenario: teach people to hate others who are not like themselves. There was a 226% increase in hate crimes in counties that hosted a Trump rally in 2016. Emergency actions and violence hold special appeal for a leader whose competency is being questioned and his popularity ratings are in decline. Speaking out against authoritarian such as Khashoggi and Navalny makes you a target for assassination. Count on it. Immigrants are a priori criminals, killers, predators. An immigrant invasion, which justifies the discontinuation of habeas corpus. Customs agents echo Nazi procedures. Children are being taken away to have a bath. Then prison and deportation. Evangelical Christian adoption agencies like Bethany Child Services, supported by Betsy DeVos's family, in line with Hitler and Pinochet. Torture facilities in detention camps in Clint and McAllen, Texas, where facilities were so crowded, adults had to stand on the toilets to breathe. And we have all learned about the black hole of Louisiana. Here is a few photographs of where people are taken in Louisiana. Tools are used to persuade his people to spy on neighbors. Human rights and civil liberties are a thing of the past. The play's the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. What is it to live in an authoritarian world? Lie in bed, listen to the night, fearing a knock on the door. Will they come to get me this evening? Or apply for U.S. citizenship in Vermont and be arrested by masked men without uniforms and be forced into unmarked cars? And then driven away. Recalls the actions of Erdogan of Turkey and Pinochet of Chile. Here's our friend Mohsen Madawi, who I met 10 years ago in the Ledyard Bank after he escaped Ramallah in the West Bank, as this is portraying. And he appeared 10 years ago with me in the class we did in the Wilder Center. It was exactly 10 years ago. I had just met him the day before, and I asked him if he would speak to my class. His English was halting at the time. He'd just been here a few months. And he looked at Gail Trottier, who was the manager of the Ledyard Bank at that time, and he said, I have a job here at the Ledyard Bank. How many were in that class? Oh. And she said, oh, David, he can speak to your class. I'll give him the morning off. So he came in and sat down, just like a room like this, but in the Wilder Center, sat next to Faye. And at a certain point, I was talking about Palestine. And I said, you know, to really understand about Palestine and Israel, we need to, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could listen to a person from Palestine? And I said, we can do that. And I introduced Mohsen Madawi, who wasn't here more than a few weeks, from Palestine. He had never spoken to an English audience. And you could have heard a pin drop. You could have heard a pin drop, and we all went over to the canoe club for lunch, and Mohsen came with us. Have most of you followed Mohsen's story? You know the story. Some of you not? Mohsen went from here to Lehigh University for 2 years, then to Columbia University, This was before October 7th and the blow up in Gaza, in Israel. And because of his instant charisma, compassion, efforts for peace, he was immediately elected president of the Palestinian Student Association at Columbia. This was before the blow up. Then when things became heated and violent, not violent, but protests, he dropped out of the organization. But he had been photographed as a protester of what Israel was doing in Gaza. And then his friend, Mahmoud Khalil, was arrested and put on an airplane and taken to Louisiana. And our friend who lives in Norwich, worked at Danowitz, worked at the Ledyard Bank, was here. This is in my library at home. Went into hiding. And he was in hiding for 3 weeks. At which time, he received a letter from the Immigration Services from the United States honoring his application a year ago for U.S. citizenship. So we had studied all the books and knew the Constitution backwards and forwards and given an appointment to appear at the Immigration Service. And since he lives in Vermont, that was in Burlington, Vermont. We talked on the phone, and he was apprehensive, scared that it might be a trap, but wanted to go and appear for his citizenship papers. And he's just about to graduate Columbia. So he wisely contacted various appropriate groups, attorneys in New York City, etc. And he came up to Vermont in the middle of the night, so no one knew where he was, and met with a group of people for breakfast that morning where he was in Burlington. People had video cameras, etc. And then he went in to have his exam and receive the next step in becoming a U.S. citizen. He filled out all the forms. He answered every question correctly. He signed the final paper and handed it in for his U.S. citizenship. And then cars drove up. Masked men got out, went in and handcuffed him. And I'm going to show you what happened. This is at the Immigration Service in Burlington. They handcuffed him after he had passed the exam. This was photographed by friends of his with their cell phones. Unmarked cars, masked men from our government, and essentially kidnapped him and drove away. That's the United States of America today. He was to have been driven to the airport in Burlington and put on an airplane to New York with a connection to Louisiana. But papers had been filed with a judge in Burlington, a federal judge, who the plan was to issue papers preventing the government from putting him on an airplane and taking him out of Vermont. But that paper from the judge didn't arrive as soon as expected, and so Mosen, sitting in the back handcuffed, had to figure out what to do, because he obviously didn't want to be on that airplane. So he was very pleasant and cordial with the guys who handcuffed him. And he said, you know, I haven't eaten I'm really hungry. Do you think we could stop and get a burger? So the guy said, okay. And Mosen was really nice and cooperative. And Mosen said, well, let me tell you, I'd like some ketchup on it and some mayonnaise and pickle if they can do it and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. He said, well, we understand. So they pulled off somewhere on the way to the airport in Burlington to get Mosen some food. He says, I haven't eaten. So he ate, sitting in the back seat, handcuffed, this food for which they had stopped. And then Mosen says, you know, I feel sick. I think I'm going to throw up. And the last thing these guys, oh my God, what do we do with this guy? We don't want him to throw up in the car, et cetera, et cetera. The whole thing was sufficiently delayed by Mosen being an honest, decent guy that they got to the airport too late and the plane had left. So they didn't know what to do with Mosen, and there is no federal lockup facility in Vermont. So they took him to the Vermont Detention Center up in northern Vermont, right near the border, and locked him up. And he was there for 16 days. I did learn that he could receive mail, so a number of us wrote letters. Steve, you did that. We wrote letters to Mosen up in the detention center. I called his, I don't know, they have a social worker who works, so I talked to the social worker. And then a trial was scheduled for either May 2nd or May 3rd, something like that. And Faye and I had just gotten back from California, and I said, Faye, I got to go. And I left at 5 o'clock in the morning from Hanover to drive up to Burlington to be in the courtroom when his case was going to be heard. But I didn't want to drive up there and then not get in, and they only have a 24 seats for the public. And I was determined I was going to want to be in. Oh, and I had learned, who was that who told me? Oh, a friend in Vermont had gone up for a hearing a couple days before, and he had a cell phone in his pocket. And when he gets to the to go through into the courtroom, they found he had a cell phone and he was barred. So he said he ran out to put his cell phone back in his car, and by that time more people had come in and he couldn't go in. So I was very careful to leave everything in the car, no cell phones, nothing. And I took a bucket and I sat down in the front door of the courthouse on a bucket at 7 o'clock in the morning, waiting for it to open at 9. So I sat there to be absolutely first in line to be in the courtroom, which I was, and Mosen was, they listened very politely. The government presented their case, that he's a danger to our foreign policy, that he's an escape artist, that he's going to flee the government, flee the country. And the judge handed down right then and there a lengthy decision, which obviously had been prepared beforehand, but he carefully read through it. It was a number of pages. And Mosen was released in the courtroom. Now he was free. And I'm thinking, I didn't know whether Mosen had a car, what happened. I didn't know all that. And so as we're walking together out of the courtroom, I said, Mosen, would you like a lift back to Norwich? And Mosen said, well, I have a few people I want to talk to. I didn't know what he meant. As we walked out the front door of that federal courthouse in Burlington, there were close to 500 people outside cheering and waving and all excited to see Mosen Madawi. And I had no idea that that was going to happen. And then instantly it appeared in the New York Times, Rachel Maddow, across the country and in Europe. And he became a national hero for what had happened. The judge said that you have to remain in either Vermont or I give you permission to be back at Columbia University. So Mosen went back to Columbia and found a route that you can go from Vermont, go west and straight into New York without going through Massachusetts, and was legally from Vermont into New York, and he graduated with a degree. It's enough to make you cry. This is the Columbia graduation. This is a few days after 16 days in detention. I would have, of course, invited Mosen to be here this morning, but he can't be because he could be arrested outside of Vermont. So that's the reason he's not here. But I wanted you to be aware of this story. So this raises the question of, has our secret police state arrived? People said, I'm crazy to give a talk like this in the United States of America, in a hospital. I'm 86 years old. Am I nuts? Well, this is like the East German Stasi police. Very, very similar. And let me show you a few photographs of what the East German regime lived under. Files of every individual. Now it's easy in the computer. They don't need these shelves anymore. They've got it all in the computer on every one of us. Here's their headquarters in East Germany. And how different were those Stasi secret police in Germany, East Germany under the communists, than these pictures of our immigration forces, just like this, arresting without any identification, any charges, any crime, picking up Mosen and locking him up. So I urge all of you to see this movie, which you can download very, very easily on your television at home.
It's a good movie.
The Lives of Others. This is my recommendation. I can't show you the whole movie here, but you can look at it at home. The Lives of Others. And you will see what it was like in East Germany and what it is to have a secret police. You will see that something is rotten. Our nation that never endured dictatorial leadership or foreign occupation now has firsthand experience of the authoritarian playbook. The privilege to enjoy personal freedom, if we think that is a positive value, living within a democracy, taking freedom for granted, becomes a weakness when that freedom is under assault. We've never experienced losing that freedom. We need to wake up or congratulate those who did such a fine job of hoodwinking some of us. They did a fine job. It's the unmarked cars. What are the names of the men in plain clothes, their faces hidden behind masks? What do they have to hide? For what agency do they work? Who handcuffed my friend? Why? Where did they take him or her? In an unmarked car. Why does it need to be unmarked? Watch the movie, The Lives of Others. A dreadful familiarity for those who lived in countries terrorized by a secret police. Every time a doorbell rings, we now shudder. A catastrophic interruption of daily life. And I can't tell you how many friends of ours now have cameras in the front door of their houses. As anybody approaches, a huge bright light goes on, and they can see who's in front before they open the door. ICE vehicles parked outside university campuses, outside workplaces, on your street, in front of your home, wearing brown uniforms that resemble those of the United Parcel Service. Is a package being delivered, or am I about to be the package delivered who knows where? Don't open the door. Don't leave the house. Have food delivered. What kind of a world are we living in? Imprisoned indefinitely in a Louisiana hellhole or a foreign country with no due process, no charge of a crime, no innocence until proven guilty. Our Secretary of Homeland Security, posing against the background of men in cages, threatening more people with the same punishment. Kristi Noem admitted to New Hampshire Senator Hassan she did not know anything about a writ of habeas corpus. Irrelevance of the law, helplessness of judges and lawyers, no notification, no transparent process, Homeland Security was designed to be a secret police force in the wake of 9/11, to operate in opaque ways with broad authority. Give us a person, we'll find the infraction. Can you actually prove that you're a citizen? If you're stopped, can you prove that you're here legally? Can you prove you're a citizen? I'm sorry, folks, but your New Hampshire driver's license doesn't do it. That does not prove that you're here legally. There's an app called Ice Raid, a protocol that delegates intelligence gathering tasks to citizens. There are rewards for capturing images of criminal illegal activity, incentivizing people to report their neighbors. That is what's happening. Your neighbors are watching you. Someone came up to me during the break a few minutes ago and asked whether I would ask a few of those people who wrote me letters, as I mentioned yesterday, that there's another way of thinking about this, and would I invite them to come up and say a few words, which I think is a reasonable request. I had to tell the person who came up, they're not here. They're not here. The state has outsourced surveillance. You should know that our governor, Kelly Ayotte, has encouraged the New Hampshire State Patrol and Grafton County authorities, including the Sheriff's Department, and other city and county officers to cooperate with the federal immigration authorities. So a New Hampshire State Patrol, a Grafton County Sheriff, has the right and the privilege and the direction by our governor to come and question anybody in New Hampshire as to their legal status. The little bit of good news, I don't know how good it is that the Hanover, Lebanon, and Hartford police forces have refused to do so in light of Kelly Ayotte requiring the New Hampshire State Patrol and Grafton County, who have acquiesced in doing so. What is it like to live in such a state? Citizens, a feeling of being constantly watched, a sense of random danger. Anyone can be a plainclothes agent or a self-appointed enforcer. Living in growing isolation with a low-level dread of a secret police state. The lost ability to plan for the future. No control over what we thought were going to be our normal lives. These people try to make themselves invisible, move through the world without looking for fear of seeing too much. That's us. While we are still capable of looking, we have to say what we see. For those who have experienced it, they know what they see. The United States has become a secret police state. You try to deny it, you're wrong. Here it is. Mosen can't leave Vermont. He's committed no crime. He was arrested by masked men. How does it all end? Most authoritarians do not leave office voluntarily. They do not want to abandon their hubris, aggression, and greed. Never underestimate the strong man's tenacity and his will to do whatever it takes, violence included, to stay in power. Understanding this, January 6th of a few years ago should have been no surprise. Strong men do not vanish with their exits from power, but remain as traces within the body politic of their people. Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Empathy is the fundamental weakness of Western civilization. Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. Alas, poor people, we knew democracy, the rule of law, empathy, and civil liberties. So that finishes my little discourse on the rules of authoritarian rule. So let's ask a different question. What is the psychology of the strong man? The rogue nature of the leader. He proclaims law and order, yet enables lawlessness. It's intoxicating to be able to commit criminal acts with impunity. The thrill of transgression, mixed with the comfort of others submitting to his power, endows his life with energy, purpose, and drama. Rising up as a leader, but being a mediocre man, crude, uncultured, is seen by the masses without college degrees and resentful of the elites as exceptional, embodying the national everyman. He is one of us. They are not seen as dangerous until it is too late. Donald Trump didn't have his own master plan, but one fed to him by the Federalist Society and the 2025 Project. He just simply lied to all of us that he didn't know anything about it. It was all put in place for day one. Their real talents are those of the con man rather than the chess master. Quickness at making the most of opportunities and taking advantage of others. If that involves violence, well, so be it. They have developed the skill of getting people to bond with them and believe their fictions and a willingness to do anything necessary to get the absolute authority they crave. He channels his brutality into humbling their pride, crushing their freedom of conscience, diminishing their merits, transforming them into flunkies stripped of all dignity. The strong man loves only those whom he can despise. At the heart, above the law, above judgment, not beholden to the truth. In an authoritarian world, the legal and the illegal, fact and fiction, celebrity and politics blend together until nothing means anything. Everything is a confidence game. Who has the cards? Compassion, empathy, caring are not part of a transaction. Strong men dread being laughed at. They truly do not know what empathy is. A resentment of the educated and of universities who strive for truth and honesty and experience. Every strong man targets universities, students, faculty, staff. Their hallmark, a drive to accumulate and control bodies, territory, and wealth. The elite gathering staged in private spaces. Mar-a-Lago. Bottomless need for control and adoration. Having it all is never enough for men who live in a secret state of dread at losing everything. Pursued by the demon of fear. Fear is why these rulers use blackmail, retribution, a cloak of masculine invincibility. They seek out other strong men, as I showed you last week, and how many visitors have come to the White House and from where they came. They seek out these other strong men as partners who will legitimate their authoritarian worldview. They all believe they have been touched by divine providence. They don't understand our Constitution. They never read it. They don't know that our Constitution does not begin with, I, the President, but rather, we, the people. Their world of authoritarian politics is one of greed, fear, distrust, and hostility. They live on charisma, seduction, and threat, celebrating male authority. Instead of a golden reign of compassion, empathy, and liberal Western values of democracy, there's a black coat of indifference falling upon the people. They have lost the eyes of love and caring. They no longer see clearly. The disintegration of values and the destruction of conscience. What can and what must we learn from other societies? What are the commonalities between Trump and recognized authoritarian leaders? Are there commonalities? And if so, what are they? Traits, philosophies, skills, agendas, plans. Yeah, there are. There are. Populist rhetoric. Champions of the people against the elites. Resentment about the status quo. Make our country great again. Make America healthy again. Forget about vaccines. Defender and preserver of national identity. Nationalism. Rational interests above international cooperation. Cultural, national purity, xenophobic, anti-immigrant. Protect national sovereignty and perceived cultural and ethnic homogeneity from foreign influence and those whose skin color is not white. Authoritarian tendencies, centralizing power, undermining democratic institutions, the election process, checks and balances, rejection of liberal democratic norms from the top-down governance, consolidation of power, undermine media, judicial independence, anti-establishment and anti-elite rhetoric, suspicious of a deep state, drain the swamp, those who are corrupt. Those who are corrupt, can you imagine? Positioning himself against the Northeast elites. The state is corrupt, disconnected from the true will of the people. We outsiders, reformers, bypass traditional institutions and norms, calling what we do a more direct form of governance. Manipulation of the media, fake news, delegitimate critical media, suppress dissent, loyalist outlets made easier with social media. And then the cult of the personality. Image and branding thrives on adoration, a symbol of national strength and purity. I can get away with anything. Surrounded by beautiful women, centralized authority. He is the nation's well-being. Alliances with religious, business, political, wealthy elites. Repudiation of an electoral loss, a violent coup attempt. Come back as a convicted felon. He has come back to finish the job of wrecking our democracy. He has come back. He has truly proven himself to be above the law. Militarism and the use of force. Admiration for strong men, such as his adoration for Vladimir Putin. And January 6th, to secure political dominance at home and project power abroad. 1 week from today is going to be this massive parade down Constitution Avenue, costing between $25 and $45 million. That's projected to ruin the streets in Washington, D.C., because they're not prepared for the weight of the tanks they're going to go through the city. And if my prediction is correct from what I've read and seen, Trump will be leading it, just as he adored Emmanuel Macron coming down the Champs-Élysées on Bastille Day a few years ago. Disregard for democratic norms and institutions. Challenge election results. Ask for more vote power by any means. Disregard democratic safeguards. Don't bother to read the Constitution. Due process? What's that? My lawyers will take care of it. And then a disdain for education. This is bottom line. Throughout history, tyrants have understood that their major enemy is an educated citizenry. Slaveholders prohibited the enslaved from learning to read in our South. Nazis burned books. Ignorance is the handmaiden of tyranny. Trump never learned, as every child should, an understanding of the Constitution, the meaning and importance of the rule of law, and why no one should be above it. He has stated that he wants to liberate our children from the Marxist lunatics and perverts who have infested our educational system. He has canceled federal exams that measure student progress and ordered his wrestling executive turned education secretary to shut most of her department. This is the playbook of authoritarian leaders. He's following every one of them. He has attacked the freedom of speech of the university students and professors and halted funds to universities who think diversity is important. And in my notes I have Harvard, exclamation, exclamation. This is more than a culture war or an attack on the liberal state. This is an attack on the American mind. And there's a particular antipathy for Harvard. And I want to open this up for any suggestions you might have as to why Trump has it in for Harvard. I'm open. Yes?
He didn't get selected to go to Harvard, and his son got turned down from Harvard also.
Number one, Trump applied to Harvard, as I mentioned last week, in 1964. That's where his father, Fred, wanted him to go, and Harvard turned him down. Don't cross an authoritarian leader, and if you do, expect retribution. Yes, number one, this is our projection, our thoughts, but he was rejected from Harvard and has never forgiven Harvard. Anybody else? Yes?
It's perceived as the institution, educational institution of the elite.
Of the elite.
Yes.
And nothing could be more correct than that. Yes? That they see that Harvard as the elite. Yes?
Well, it's worldwide known for its science, its research, and respect around the world.
Yes? Nice and loud.
The head of the board is a Pritzker, and his company and the Pritzkers have fallen out years ago.
Okay, I was waiting for that. So this is what many of you may or may not know. Harvard is run, managed, controlled by a board of overseers. And the chairman of the Harvard Corporation, the board of overseers of Harvard University, chairman is now Penny Pritzker. Some years ago, Penny's father, Jay Pritzker, whose family were immigrants from the Ukraine, such as my ancestors, came to America and started some real estate companies in New York. And the Pritzker family, Jay Pritzker in particular, you can look this up, I don't have all the details at my fingertips, but it was involved, as you're suggesting, in a hotel in New York City, which became the Hyatt. And their company became the Hyatt Hotels. Penny Pritzker is a descendant of that family, the daughter of that family. She earned her BA degree at Harvard, but at the time back there was a major feud between the Pritzker family and Donald Trump. They were furious, Trump was, and the Pritzkers essentially won. And Donald Trump has never forgiven the Pritzkers for doing him in on this hotel. When you go home, type in Pritzker, Harvard, Trump, and the whole story will come out. And so this retribution presently by Donald Trump against Harvard is a play on his being turned down for admission in 1964 and this feud with the Pritzker family and the Donald Trump real estate efforts in New York City. And of course, as Clint Swift mentioned, this is the epitome of the elite. And what did anybody have any thoughts about maybe a week, 10 days ago, when the government sent Faye? Yes.
Well, I was going to premise that the parallel existed with Colombia. There was a big land deal that the Trump people wanted. Colombia took a different move, and he never got over that. Still punishing them.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Yes, Trump has been involved in a big deal with Columbia over a site of land, real estate in New York City also. So of all the universities, he has no love for Harvard and no love for Columbia, and that's where his wrath has been taken out. So understanding that, anybody recognize this? Where is this?
Yale.
This is Yale University. Before I go on to Yale, let me ask Clint the significance of the ICE agents being sent to Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard to round up 40 immigrants. Does that play any significance?
You're asking me if that has any significance?
Yeah.
Of course it does.
Why were they sent, of all the other places, to Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket?
I imagine, based on the slide, there's some connection there with
No, I think it's totally consistent with what you just said, is that this is the epitome of the elite. In the mind of most people, oh, the New England elite, including Obama, Alan Dershowitz. Oh.
Let me tell you a little story.
Clint, stand up so everybody can hear you.
A long time ago, when I was in college at Brown, George Wallace came to speak. And I went out with many of my classmates to kind of mock him. Obviously, very much a populist. This was before he was shot. And he was a very charismatic speaker. But to your point about Trump positioning himself against the elites, I'll never forget something he said about Harvard professors. He referred to them as those pointy-headed intellectuals who couldn't even park their bicycles straight. That was his line. That's kind of what you're dealing with. Some of you may have known Henry Ehrman, who was a professor at Dartmouth. He was also a judge in Berlin when the Nazis took over. And thankfully, he and his wife did escape. But Henry told me that, yes, Hitler positioned himself very much, obviously, against the Jews. But he also said he positioned himself very forcefully against the intellectuals and the judges. They also ended up in concentration camps.
Okay, so why do I put Yale up here? For a Harvard graduate to put up Yale? Well, one has to ask, where is Trump's wrath against Yale? Well, maybe this helps explain it. These are all Yale grads. These are Yaleys. 2 on the Supreme Court, and most importantly, our vice president. And we wouldn't want to attack Yale. And not a word has been mentioned of Yale. Okay. So now, let me also mention the attack and the disdain for education. It was just a few months ago, and very, very shortly after Trump was in office, exhibiting the common trait of disdain for education and an educational institution over which he could exert total control, that he went into the library of the United States Naval Academy, of which you see an older picture here, and went through and had his men take out of the library and censor a whole slew of books that they didn't want read by U.S. cadets who were training to be in the United States Naval Services. So now I want to turn to 2 local stories. But first, I just mentioned I have 2 slides. A reminder that when one censors books, as the Nazis did in burning books, this is in Germany, 1939, 1940, 1941, and another picture of the Nazis burning books written that the next thing they burned bodies. First they burned books, and then they burned bodies. And here it is. The Nazis burned these books. And that is what our government is essentially doing, already starting at the United States Naval Academy Library. Now I want to share with you a totally personal story, a tale of 2 colleges. The 2 colleges that have been most influential for me. But I want to go back to a class I did, can you believe this, 25 years ago, in 2007. How many of you were in my class, Race to the Polls? Ginia. Okay. The story is, and I don't know how I fell into this. Faye found some book written by Ernest Shackleton, and I found it, and I started reading it. My mouth fell open, reading the story of the race for the South Pole between the English and the Norwegians to be first to be at the South Pole. And part of that story involves an Englishman, Ernest Shackleton, who went to the South Pole, to the Antarctica, 5 times. And the story is that on one of the most famous voyages ever, he was in a ship called the Endurance. And this ship was crushed by the ice. And all of his men were trapped on a tiny little island called Elephant Island. And this was before radio. So nobody had any communication. Nobody in the world, back in the Royal Society, the Royal Geographic Society in London, nobody knew where these men were. There would be no way to know. Their ship was crushed. And they were going to end the rest of their lives freezing to death, trying to eat some seals, and that's it. And so, obviously, I forget the exact number, maybe 18 men or something like that were trapped on Elephant Island. Type in Shackleton, you'll see it immediately. And some of these small cadre of men became enemies of Ernest Shackleton. Some he thought they should do this, some thought that he should do that, and there were disagreements among these 18 men who had different ideas of how to survive. And they knew of an island a long ways away where there was a whaling station at Grytviken. And the only way that they could possibly save their life would be to get in a rowboat, which they had from the Endurance, and row across the Antarctic Sea to Grytviken, where there was a whaling station. Otherwise, they're all going to die. Shackleton had to choose 5 or 6 men to go with him. The others are going to Elephant Island, and all their hopes are going to be on these 5, 6 men to make it across this distance. I don't remember. They have no navigation. They hope they're going the right direction to find this island. It's 40 degrees below zero. Just imagine this. And Shackleton had to choose who should go in this small rowboat with him across the open sea to Grytviken. The story is that he carefully chose a number of men who absolutely disagreed with him to be with him and to work out their future together rather than feud, and better to have them close rather than sow more discontent back on Elephant Island. And so the phrase neutralize threats with proximity. All right, just remember that. And this lesson is taught, I understand, in business schools at Tuck, at Harvard, at Stanford, all over the country. The decision by Shackleton to keep your enemies close. And they made it. They made it across the sea, and all the men were eventually rescued. That's the Shackleton story by David Bisno in 30 seconds. Now, why am I telling you this? Because let me tell you what I learned and become aware of in the past 2 weeks. This is a story of Harvard and Dartmouth. Whether you're aware of this or not, I don't know. But it's been in the Valley News, if you're awake enough to really read behind the headlines what's happening, at both Harvard and at Dartmouth. And it comes, I put it in the form of shameful capitulation or smart strategic decision. And I've been in correspondence. Jim Sargent has a close colleague friend who's a graduate of Dartmouth, went on to law school, and he became head of the tobacco division of the FDA. And he teaches with Jim in various classes, and Mitch Zeller and I keep in constant touch with each other. He's an absolute loyal son of Dartmouth. And he is dumbfounded by what has happened. What has happened has to go back to William and Mary. Okay, so this gets a little complicated, but not too complicated. So just keep all this in mind. For about 10 years, I would go down to William and Mary every September to their law school for a Supreme Court conference. And then I'd come back and do these classes on the Supreme Court and constitutional law. And I would meet various people. I was the only doctor there. I was keeping my mouth shut, and I'd just sit and listen to these panels and discussions and so forth. And I, quote, got to know or got to recognize, listen to, became a little bit familiar with a number of the really big shot people at the Supreme Court. And some years ago, I was in listening to a panel with this gentleman by the name of Canon Shanmugam. I have trouble pronouncing his name. Well, I want to tell you that I sat in a room something like listening to Canon. And I could say, I have never listened to somebody who I thought was brighter. This guy was, I mean, this is one of the smartest people I've ever listened to. I was blown away. And he's really good looking, and he's really smart, and he's pleasant and gracious and polite. He has it all. He has it all. I was blown away. But every view that he expressed was really, really conservative. And I'm thinking to myself, how could somebody be so terrific and be so conservative? He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard College and magna cum laude from Harvard Law School. He has argued 47 cases before the Supreme Court. This guy's got it all. And he's like Moses. You'd put your armors around him. He's just the best. And every view that he expressed was really, really conservative. And he did it really well. So I arranged to have a slice of pizza and a Coca-Cola with him at lunchtime. And I sat down with Cannon, who I'd never met before, and I said, Cannon, I know of your accomplishments. We both went to the same college. But let me ask you a question. How did you get to be so goddamn conservative? How could you go through Harvard College and Harvard Law School, Lawrence Tribe, etc., and have the views that you do? He says, well, you know, David, when my family moved from India, we ended up in Kansas. And you know, David, in Kansas, they don't believe in Darwin. They don't believe in the origin of species. And that's the conservative atmosphere in which I grew up in Kansas. And we didn't go any further than that. And, you know, after a day or so, I left Williamsburg and came back to see Faye in Hanover, and I'm back. But my mind was blown by Canon Shanmugam and how really, really, really capable and bright this gentleman is. Look him up. You'll be blown away. Okay. So then, a few weeks ago, Shion Beilock, our president of Dartmouth, announces that she has appointed a new lawyer to be the head attorney for Dartmouth College. And his name is Matt Raymer. Maybe I should close the doors so nobody hears me. But he's the head attorney for Dartmouth. And if you look up his credentials, he has been a deep association with the Republican National Committee and with the Heritage Foundation. His credentials are superb. He's really bright, and he's been totally, deeply connected with the Heritage Foundation, which wrote Project 2025, and with the Republican National Committee. So when this was announced, our friend Mitch Zeller learns about this. Mitch lives in Washington, D.C., and we were on the phone immediately going, what the hell is going on at Dartmouth that Shion Beilock, who most of us hold in high regard and respect and admire, and I truly do, what is she doing hiring this very capable, well-trained, well-educated attorney who has really very deep conservative credentials? In the Valley News, I think it was 3 days ago, there was a front page article about a Dartmouth grad who lives out in California who was so blown away by this choice that he wrote, it's in the Valley News a few days ago. Did you see it? That Shion Beilock and Dartmouth should immediately fire Matt Raymer because he doesn't hold the values that we think are important. And we wondered, what in the hell is going on? Why would Shion Beilock hire, as the head attorney at Dartmouth, a gentleman bright and accomplished as he is, who holds such conservative values? Okay, so the next step in this story is that last week I decided to go to the Harvard graduation. So I drove down the night before, stayed over with a friend. Here's the Harvard Yard, May 29th, 2025. There were 10,000 people in the Harvard Yard. This is in front of Widener Library for the graduation. Everybody in that yard knew what had happened with the federal government and Harvard and Alan Garber. We were all presented with a program of the graduation festivities. The invocation, the benediction, the speaker, the Latin speaker, and the awarding of honorary degrees. But nowhere in that program was it announced that President Alan Garber is going to give a talk. He wasn't on the program. He was there handing out the degrees, but not giving a talk. As soon as the band finished playing at the very beginning, Alan Garber got up and he started speaking. This was unscheduled.
Thank you. Welcome, family and friends, champions and supporters. Welcome, guests from down the street, across the country, and around the world. And welcome, members of the class of 2025. Members of the class of 2025 from down the street, across the country, and around the world. Around the world, just as it should be.
I can tell you that there were 10,000 people in tears as he was giving that talk. I've been in the Harvard Yard a lot, and I've never been there with 10,000 people crying with courage and with defiance and with pride, as what happened last Thursday in Cambridge. He goes on for a few minutes, and then the procedure went on. And so when the graduation festivities, and they sang Fair Harvard with tears, everybody was crying. We walked out, and I got in my car and drove home. And about 5 o'clock, I received an email, which was one of 260,000 emails that were sent to every living Harvard alum in the world from Alan Garber, who you just saw speak. And he announced that the board, Penny Pritzker, and the Board of Overseers at Harvard had appointed Canon Shanmugam to be on the Board of Overseers of Harvard. Now, this is an absolute parallel to what Shion Beilock did here at Dartmouth. And I want you all to be aware of these two moves by the president of Dartmouth and the president of Harvard, and whether either or each of them knows the story of Shackleton, I'm not sure. But the lesson of Shackleton is clear. And the question, let me see if I have that slide. The question in front of us is whether this is shameful capitulation by the president of Dartmouth and the president of Harvard, or very smart, strategic decision on how best to see the survival of their two schools. And that question has yet to play out. But I shared it with Faye that I thought it'd be remiss if I didn't share these two stories with you that have just happened. Yes?
Harvard went further just before that announcement, chose some lawyers.
Nice and loud, please, so everybody can hear you.
It chose, what was his name, Shore, who was in the Justice Department and was viewed, and said Biden was elderly and all that. So she, also against the grain, chose some lawyers to put on that staff to defend themselves against the government who had that pull.
Yeah, so in each case, both presidents have held close people who have inside tracks to this government. I think it's really, really interesting. Despite our friend Mitch Zeller being livid about Shion Bilak's choice. Do you have anything more to add, Jim?
Well, I'm mixed in my mind about it. Because on one hand,
We stand up so everybody can hear you. Jim is professor of pediatrics at the med school and lots of other positions.
on one hand, I just don't believe in what he stands for. Okay, I mean, he's come out against the people that are born here should be citizens. He's come out publicly against that notion. On the other hand,
That's birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
Matt Raymer is absolutely against it.
so well, he's come out. I don't know what he would say now.
Right.
He's written about it.
Yes.
In the past. On the other hand, we have faculty members in Middle Eastern Studies who teach about Israel and Palestine, but who aren't U.S. citizens. There's one person that I'm thinking of in particular. He's an Egyptian citizen, and his passport has just been revoked. So the idea of us putting ourselves in the public eye, in the sights of the administration, scares me. I get worried for those people. So I kind of think it's a smart strategic decision, and I'm willing to kind of go with this guy in the hopes that he can keep us out of the sights of the administration. On the other hand, the president of the college has joined the lawsuits that the university associations have against the government for the things that they're trying to do with the grants and contracts and things like that. So I think she's walking the line in a really careful and strategic way.
Can you explain what she signed and didn't sign?
Well, what she didn't sign was a statement by universities,
Presidents.
university presidents.
Can everybody hear
Yeah.
Jim? Yeah,
What
okay.
she didn't sign was a statement, but Dartmouth has joined other colleges in all of the kind of collective lawsuits against administration action. So what she says is, well, I'll put Dartmouth on the line when it really matters, but I don't want to, put Dartmouth in the sights just for public statements. So, you can disagree about how she's running the balancing act, whether she should have signed that statement or not. But I think she's doing her best at walking a really delicate balance right now. So I think she's doing okay. And I'm not a conservative.
Yes. Steve, stand up so we can hear you.
Yeah, David, what I'm thinking of is this is not capitulation. This is bringing your enemies closer so that you can actually listen, to develop a dialogue, which is what Braver Angels does on a regular basis. And Dershowitz, the infamous, I say, Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz from Harvard, once had a radio program. And on the radio program, he would start off each one with saying, I listened so closely to my opponent during a trial that they could almost convince me of their side of it. You have to shut up and listen to the people who are so opposite in you to understand where it's really, 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 really coming from. And when if you hear it from 1,000 miles away or read it in the paper, it's not the same as having that person in front of you on a regular basis. These two presidents didn't give those people power over Harvard or Dartmouth. They gave them a voice. And they can control that voice if they want to, but they have to listen. And I think it's time for us to listen to the people who seem so opposite from us to understand what's really hurting them and what they fear the most.
Steve, that's exactly why I told referral to Ernest Shackleton and what he did in the boat that James Caird going for survival. Okay, so stay tuned and read your papers as to what's going on with this attempts at survival. Very quickly, going back to my list of anti-globalism, skepticism of NATO, the United Nations, World Health Organization, trade agreements, climate accords, scapegoating, divisiveness, targeting political opponents, minority groups, pull people together against a common enemy, fabricating threats to our national security, national values, gender, religion, create fear. A national crisis that justified strong authorities and actions prompted Franklin Roosevelt. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. And that is what Trump is spreading across this country. And in this room is fear. Why we're putting up lights at our front doors so we can see who approaches. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. Appeal to racial ideologies, white, Christian, nationalism. It might be curious to find out who are the white, Christian, evangelical nationalists within our government. I'll let you just look at these. I don't have to go through all their names. You probably recognize most of them. So we now appreciate the commonalities of who's leading this country with the authoritarian leaders we've seen in the past and presently across the whole world. It's enough. It's enough to be aghast at what's happening here. Who are we? And what do we want? We've always wanted a purse filled with gold and to frolic in a fountain of youth. We won't find either, but we've learned to settle with a table covered with food, the price of which we've earned by earnest work. We want our education to have been of value, and the lessons we've learned along the path of life to be of no less value. We want the weapon that will never miss, and the castle that will keep us safe. We want a modicum of excitement and adventure. But what we really crave is reliable routine and security upon which we can rely. We want to love and be loved in return. We want to love the children who will love us with the respect we think we've earned. We want our government to be one of wisdom, justice, compassion, because it's those values by which we've lived our lives. That's who we are. But that's not where we are. Wake up, America. We've gone over the precipice. When Faye and I first started dreaming up this class, I asked Faye, what should I call it? And she said, standing at the precipice. I said, that's perfect. And we made up that logo, advertisement flyer, using Joe Medlicott's suggestion that we read It Can't Happen Here. Well, it has happened here. It is. We've gone not standing at the precipice, but we've gone over the precipice. We've ignored the discontent among us, allowing a strong man, carefully tutored by his father, who answers only to his own ego and avarice, to become this country's authoritarian, if not fascist leader. Thank you very, very much for joining us. I appreciate it. Okay, so we have time for a few comments and suggestions. Ginia.
Thank you. I think this is a perfect opportunity to say everybody who's listening, and I'm sure you all are, ought to sign up for the summer lecture series.
Yes. Yes.
All right?
Yes.
Because we are going to be looking at the 4 freedoms. Exactly. And I also should say, David, that I am a Vassar graduate. I was so proud of my president, Vassar, who did a wonderful letter to all alums, and I was disappointed at Sion. I thought, what's your problem? However, the more I've thought about it, the more I think she's very strategic and smart. And I think in the future we ought to look at women to see what they can do, moving us forward.
Clint, stand up, please.
Senior, first of all, thank you for really a terrifying, terrifying, David. And senior moment, I'm sorry I didn't give you the answer you were looking for on ICE coming into Martha's Vineyard. But the reason for that was that they were receptive to undocumented immigrants under the Biden administration.
Yes, exactly.
Leslie?
So,
Leslie, introduce yourself.
I'm Leslie Bisno, I'm David's cousin. Visiting from California. There was recently a movie called The Apprentice. I don't know how many of you saw it, but it was about Trump's relationship with Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was sort of a mentor to Trump. Roy Cohn was Joseph McCarthy's lawyer. Oh boy. So tonight on CNN, there is a live broadcast live from Broadway, the production of Good Night and Good Luck, which is George Clooney's play where he plays Edward R. Murrow, who's the guy who sort of exposed and changed the whole attitude of the country about the McCarthy trials. That's being broadcast live tonight at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. My question is, was it Eisenhower who was president when that happened? When the McCarthy trials were on? Was it Eisenhower who was president? So, can anybody tell me what was Eisenhower's attitude toward that? And if he was against it, why didn't he do more to stop it? Because it has to do with pushing other people away and considering them the other, which has a lot to do with this.
Steve, have you got an answer?
No, I mean, most of us lived through that era, although we were very young and couldn't appreciate what was happening over there. But I have a feeling Eisenhower was elected after World War II because he was the general in charge of the armies.
Right.
So let's elect this guy. But I have a feeling he didn't want any more of the election position after that. But I don't know those kinds of things.
Steve?
My grandfather was the U.S. Senator from Vermont who spoke out against McCarthy on the Senate floor and initiated the censure of McCarthy. So and basically his Republican colleagues regarded McCarthy as a hot potato that they wanted to keep distance from. It wasn't, they didn't agree with him, but they didn't feel empowered to speak against him. And like, if you look at Ralph Flanders in Wikipedia, you can read the speech he gave, which is really a comical and insulting speech against McCarthy.
So just so you know, we have among us very distinguished people, not only Jim Sargent, professor of pediatrics at Dartmouth, but Steve Flanders, whose grandfather, Senator Ralph Flanders from Vermont, was the first person in this country to blow the whistle on Joe McCarthy. And if you Google Senator Ralph Flanders from Vermont, it's all there and pours out as to what an impact Steve's grandfather had on United States history by blowing the whistle on what was going on. And thank you, Leslie, for pointing out tonight's broadcast of this live performance of Good Night, Good Luck. Yes?
Can you speak to the SCOTUS decision giving Trump immunity and its pervasive effect on all of this?
Personally, David Bisno thinks it's going to go down as one of the worst decisions the Supreme Court has ever made, along with Dred Scott and Korematsu and the Japanese. It's horrible. And that's all I can say, but yes.
Oh, it's another question.
Oh, many of us are just horrified at his having immunity from any official act. And he said I could go down Fifth Avenue and shoot people, and I'd still be okay. It's horrible. It's horrible. I'll tell you a little unimportant anecdote. A few days ago, my friend Mosen over in Norwich really was hankering for a burrito. And he thought they make really good burritos at that Beluco place down in the basement. So he said, I want to go get a burrito. And he was half across the Ledyard Bridge. Oh my God, I can't. And he had to turn around and make a U-turn on the bridge because he really wanted a burrito. But he realized that he could be arrested by New Hampshire State Patrol, deputized by our governor, to arrest him on the part of our immigration authorities.
You could be arrested for doing a U-turn.
That's right.
And once he was on the bridge, he was in New Hampshire.
Yeah. So, you know, we have to laugh at some stuff, right? Yes. Stand up, please.
I'm having trouble reconciling your comments, say what you see, with your reluctance to call this fascism.
With my reluctance to call it fascism?
Right, because I think it's pretty clear that's what it is. And I think we should say what we see. I agree with you.
Yeah, I understand.
Abraham Lincoln is sitting between two fascia.
Well, thank you very, very much for joining us, and I wish you all a good, safe summer.